and so on and so on. And so on and so on.
Hello, everybody. This is Will. So this week we interviewed Agon Hamza, the author and editor of a number of books, including Reading Marx, which he co-wrote with Frank Ruda and Slavoj Žižek, and a book called Repeating Žižek, which we read this week, an essay he contributed to that called A Plea for Žižekian Politics. And Agon is a political advisor to the former and possibly future Prime Minister of Kosova, Albin Kurti of the Self-Determination Party, and Agon is also the co-editor-in-chief of the philosophical journal Crisis and Critique. And if you want to hear more episodes, check out the Patreon, which is linked below. And Happy New Year, everybody. All right, so we are joined today by Agon Hamza, advisor to. Can you also advise us as the correct pronunciation of the name of the former Prime Minister, Albin Kurti? Is that correct?
That's pretty correct. It's Albin Kurti. You're fine.
Okay, thank you. We'll butcher it and anglicize it. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So yeah, we had you on to not only talk about your work with Žižek and in the whole world of that kind of philosophical orientation, but also what the situation is in your country. And maybe you just to start us off, you could just talk about what's happening there and what's happening next and kind of the whole situation.
You mean in political terms?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, 2020 was a very peculiar year. In early February, Mr. Kurti was elected in the Parliament of the Republic of Kosovo as the Prime Minister after winning the elections in October 2019. It was a long process of negotiation with the former coalition partner. It was like 15 years after the creation of the movement for self-determination movement. We started off as 14 people back in 2005, and now the movement is the biggest political organization in the country.
Incredible.
So 15 years, but very long 15 years, so to speak, in all respects. The government was formed, and on the 4th of February last year, and in 50-something days, there was a motion of no confidence initiated by our former coalition partner, and it resulted with the government losing its parliamentary majority. But what is very interesting is that we doubled the popular support. So from 20-something%, 29, if I'm not mistaken, that we had in the last elections, we are now by far the biggest political party or movement in the country, and we're going to win the majority of the elections, which are to happen in probably in a month and a half, the latest in late February this year. So then we continued as a caretaker government in the midst of the pandemic. There was an old struggle between us and the entire political scene, which was very interesting because while we were managing the pandemic quite well, it was used as one of the reasons, for getting us rid of from the government. But during that period, and it was really interesting, and I think this you may find this interesting as well, that while in the period of being a caretaker government, we did more than while we were functioning as a regular government. So you get rid of your partner, and then you can really move things forward. That lasted until 4th of June of last year, and now we're in the opposition. the Constitutional Court decided that the election of the new government was not legal. And so we're going to have a snap election, and I believe will win the majority, which will grant us the right to form the government without any partners, which is very essential for having the ground to work on our program, governing alternative, as we call it, which is it may sound like a big word, but I think essentially it is a program which aims at transforming the country in all its aspects.
And could you tell us and our listeners maybe a little bit about Albin Kurdi as a politician as well?
He started off as the students' leader back in 1997 when the students' movement in this country organized protests against the regime of Slavoj and Milosevic on liberating the higher education institutions. Then the war started, and he served as a secretary to the political representative of the Kosova Liberation Army. He was arrested during the war, and then he was released in December of 2000, if I'm not mistaken. Then we met somehow at that period, and we established some sort of friendship and collaboration. It resulted with a foundation of the movement for self-determination in 2005. And when he was elected as a prime minister, I was appointed as one of his political advisors.
And what does that advisory position look like for you? Like, how did you engage with that role?
It was very a peculiar situation, because it wasn't like 3-4 weeks within the office that the motion of no self-confidence vote was organized. So it's like first you're there, you're new, you're supposed to try to figure it out how the institutions work in its capillary dimensions, in terms of bureaucracy and state administrations and so on. So it was a position which you practically do everything,
Mm-hmm.
From pure advising to writing letters to engaging in quite passionate discussions with your fellow colleagues and other political figures. I mean, within the office, and trying to find a way how to move forward. But it's very interesting because you know the case of Syriza in Greece, right?
Yeah.
So we did really the exact opposite, and because we could have stayed in the office while making some really painful compromises, so they allow you that, make some incremental progress here and there. You don't touch the coordinates of the system, but and then you lose the popular support, and you lose next elections. So what we did is we refused to make those compromises, and under big quotation marks, we allowed that coup to happen against us,
Mm-hmm.
But we doubled the popular support while losing half of the support we had in the parliament. And I think this is something it's very difficult to think when you are within the situation,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still trying to think about the consequences of these decisions and these acts we took while we were there.
So it seems there's a difference between the public support and how the parliament actually functions. Are you sort of doubling down on public support in light of this upcoming election so that you can work the parliament differently next time, so to speak?
Yes, exactly. I think that the parliament right now in this country is not correctly represented in terms of the level of support for the movement. But I think that in the upcoming elections, we're going to have the parliamentary majority which permits us to move forward with, allows us to move forward with realizing or implementing our program. I know it's not going to be easy because we are in a rather not usual situation, and also there is something interesting because if you look at the history of the elections, if I may put it this way, in this country, what happens is that you have a snap election since the independence of 2008 onwards. No government completed its 4 years term. You know? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have an election every year, every second year, and you know. So, but I don't think that this is only a result of all these petty calculations that you make as a political party or as a government. You know, I think that there is something more to it. You know, like how should I put it? It's very different, you know, to do party form politics, and I remain a supporter of, or rather, I represent this idea that politics has to be organized within a party, within its party form. Party politics with its parliamentary basis, you know, it's not really the correct or adequate perspective on the specificities of the totality in this country, because it at least in Europe, it presupposes a nation state, you know, and the Republic of Kosova is not a nation state, you know. So you pretend that there are some stable rules in the background, you know, or they exist, while you are, by the system itself, pushed again and again back to the starting point, you know. So it's a structural problem why we go on the elections almost every year.
Right. And there's some, sorry to interrupt, it seems as though there's some crucial question as to the relation of the Balkans with the rest of Europe, not only like the continent but the EU. And you interviewed Kurti in Crisis and Critique recently, and you asked him about what the Balkans means to what you called the idea of Europe. And he answered an interesting way that, in a kind of Hegelian phrasing, that Europe reaches its notion when the Balkans joins the EU. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that, like how the kind of like remainder of the Balkans is kind of the limits of the universality of the European Union.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting interesting question, and since we are Žižekians, I will start by saying that I am Eurocentric in this sense. You know, like there is something in Europe which is almost impossible to go beyond Europe without going through Europe itself. You know, mm-hmm. And even though it is almost impossible, I don't think that it would be really desirable to do that. You know, like what these theorists of post-coloniality or others are, you know, are doing. You know, like Walter Mignolo or Hamid Dabashir, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and I apologize if I'm not. The Enlightenment is really essential, you know, and the problem is with Europe is not its other, you know, but the fact that Europe, and by Europe today I mean the European Union, is not European enough. It is not, to put it in Badiou's terms, it doesn't retain the fidelity to its own core, you know, to universality, democracy, women's rights, and liberty, and all the rest. Although with my good friend Frank Ruda, I tend to agree with him on this idea of abolishing freedom. I think you discussed about this with him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we did.
Kurti says something really interesting in that interview that Frank Ruda and I did with him for Crisis and Critique. And he said, like, you don't when you don't include Balkans in Europe, you end up losing the United Kingdom. And I think that is quite essential. The problem, again, to paraphrase Albin, is that Europe has really small ambitions. You know, its ambitions shrunk, and now we live in a really polycentric world. You know, and with all its problems, yes, I know European Union is a neoliberal organization, and there is all this trouble, the history with Greece and the way it treats the refugees and I'm sorry, and all the rest of it. But the point is to really turn the European Union in complementarity with the idea of Europe as such, you know. And the Balkans is considered as somehow, you know, like the bad neighbor down the street, you know. So we have to deal with it somehow. But they're really forgetting the fact that the integration of the Balkans within the European Union would be beneficial for two sides. It's not like we're going there to exploit the big developed rich countries of Europe. But it's essential, as Albin would say, like to realize its notion as Europe. Balkan has to be included. And
it was interesting on that front, actually, because there was basically kind of a virtual silence about the Kosovo situation in the, let's say, American left, but more broadly in left publications, I think. I mean, maybe I'm out of the loop, but I didn't hear anything about it. And I think actually the silence is emblematic of the status of the Balkans for Europe and for the West more broadly.
Yeah, that could be, but I was really not shocked, but puzzled by it, because one of the key guys who we can discuss this, maybe orchestrated or really helped massively in organizing that coup against our government, was Richard Grenell, you know, the former US ambassador to Germany. Then he was an acting director of National Security Intelligence, or how is that correct name? I'm sorry. And then he became the envoy, President Trump's envoy for the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And he's like this really close ally, aide to President Trump, as you could see in the last elections. And it's very funny if you visit his Twitter. You know, it's quite a, as they would put it in California, quite an experience. You know, and he was really instrumental in taking our government down. But I was really puzzled by the silence of the majority of the left in the U.S.
Yeah, it's strange.
Or be it an establishment or non-establishment left.
Yeah, especially because it's not so very different than what happened in Bolivia, and there's a lot. I mean, there's obviously a lot of news on that. But I think generally speaking,
a scenario being like repeated, you know.
Yeah. And it's, in my mind, it in some ways indicates the status of Europe for, I think, North American leftists is somewhat complicated, because I think the idea of Eurocentrism, and we've discussed Eurocentrism on the podcast, like Žižek's approach, which I think is analogous to yours. And it's a very interesting position in terms of like universality, and it includes the Haiti Revolution and all that. But I think Europe occupies a somewhat strange position there, because I think because the Eurocentrism like debate or concept is so powerful, it kind of keeps people away from like thinking through the emancipatory potential of what's kind of presently going on in Europe.
Yeah, but you know, like the Hegelian approach would be like it's you cannot compare apples and oranges, you know. So I think the critique has the only good critique, productive, so to speak, is those that one or debate rather discussion is that which is within the same camp, you know. And inherent, you know, and I think that what we should do with Europe is to criticize it from the perspective of its very own foundations, show or render visible that the European Union is not really complementary to what Europe as such stands for. And if you think in the history of the self-determination movement, if I may make parallel between, like when after the war, when Kosova was administered by the UN, we had this mission called UNMIK, United Nations Mission Interim in Kosova. We tried to critique their presence and their governing of this country from the standpoint of charts and resolutions of the United Nations itself.
Right.
So, and then after the independence, when the EU sent its mission on law and on the rule of law, we tried to do the same. Our critique was imminent, like this is not what Europe is. This is you're violating your own principles, be them the formal principles of the EU as well as those of the idea of Europe. So I think this is the only, or perhaps the productive way to push European Union into transforming itself further to the left, because it's amazing when you think about it.
Along those lines of I think this is quite a common Hegelian term of I think addressing imminent critiques. You write that in A Plea for Žižekian Politics, which is in the book Repeating Žižek, that politics is the name of the problem rather than the name of the solution, which is akin to how also I think you and Žižek define the communist hypothesis, among other things. How would you define the problem of politics, if that's not too broad of a question, in relation to maybe what we've been talking about with Kosova? Is Kosova an example of a sort of Žižekian understanding of politics as a naming the problem?
I think so. I think. Well, this is really a broad question,
Yeah, it is.
And let me try to give you a couple of theses. As Althusser would put it, I wrote my dissertation, PhD thesis on Althusser, and I still like this idea of thesis. Although I don't really do that, but it sounds nice. Let me put forward a few theses, as he says. So, with regard to politics being the name of the problem, well, first it is such because when you really try to solve the problems, actual existing problems, you are not within the field of politics. You're in the field of technocracy, or what now we refer to as expert knowledge. So you abstract the ideology critique. You say, yeah, forget about it. All these questions are big, while we have a real problem here. So the name of politics is the name which redefines the field within which that problem appears as a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is one of the ways to read it. For instance, if we wanna put it in the context of my country, now it's very obvious. Everybody knows that we're going to win big in the elections, right? And we're going to form the government alone, and that's really puts our, how should I call them, enemies, to use this good old term, in a very panicky situation. But my whole point is that this is not enough, because we, and this, I'm strictly talking from my own perspective. I'm not using, I'm not quoting or referring to the official position of the party or of Kurti himself. I think that in this upcoming elections, and when we get back in the government, I don't think we can really use the same methodological, conceptual, or political apparatus in the present like we used it back in our first term. I am really not doing this or keeping this position from the perspective of the so-called political realism. I belong to those who believe in change and in radical change, and realistically, I think all of us, regardless of our country, are quite desperate for it. I think it is all too easy to continue with the same method, but that is not sufficient. There is more to it. I think that something happening between June and now, a lot sorts of things, like an infamous agreement in the White House between our former Prime Minister, Serbian President, and President Trump. So that is a new element in the situation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think politically of what happened between June and January or February, and how to reshuffle this situation? This cannot be done in terms of expert knowledge or technocracy. Or does it make sense to you?
It does, yeah. And you're seemingly, in a sense, confronted by sort of these imminent concrete problems, which you need to address in a more open way, rather than just referencing what might have been used in the past. And
because in the past it was quite successful.
Mm-hmm.
It was successful because also there was if I use this term, bonding between the government and the people, government, movement, and representation and the people. It's like a tetrad, or how do you call it, right? But then I think that the coup had to happen. It was inevitable, and precisely because of it was inevitable. It opened up a space for a completely new beginning,
right?
Which is now going to happen I believe, very much in February.
So maybe turning more towards what you've spoken about of Žižek's politics, getting into the theory of Žižek's politics and relating it to this situation perhaps a little bit later on. But you mentioned you term it the borromean knot, the Lacanian term of Žižek's politics, which are psychoanalysis, philosophy, and politics. So how would you see the role of philosophy and psychoanalysis playing into an understanding of politics, the necessity of it?
This is a really complicated question again.
Sorry.
No. I don't think that philosophy thinks politics per se. I don't really think that philosophers provide answers.
Right.
I remain here with Hegel and with his All of Minerva. It takes off in the dusk. However, what we can do as philosophers is that we can engage in that idea of proper politics. Like rethinking the field into which something appears as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can really. I'm sorry.
Oh no! Please finish.
No, I just think that we can distinguish between two forms of politics, and I think I write about this in the chapter that you mentioned earlier. I think there is a very important. It is very important to distinguish between two forms of politics. I distinguish the politics with capital P, so to speak, and the politics with a small p. The first one belongs to thinking, to thinking politically or philosophically about politics, and politically in terms of philosophy, something that both Žižek and Althusser and others are very prone of doing. While keeping this position, you leave, you create the space for politics to be able to have its function as politics, in accomplishing things. For instance, Lula in Brazil was the best example, unlike Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who mixed these politics and two forms of politics. He thought that, for instance, the basic universal income was not a step towards a bigger socialist project, but he started to think of that as an accomplishment of in itself, of that being socialism. Well, Aristide, I think, regardless of the coup, presents a little bit more successful story, because I think of his references to Christianity and liberation theology. He managed to keep the emancipatory emancipatory dimension of politics, while at the same time, actually, he was engaging in all the dirty daily work of necessary work of politics as such.
Right. I mean, to say the least.
I think it is possible to dirty your hands without that leading to a corrosion or corruption of the very ideals that get one into politics.
Right, because it, like, to say the least, I think that there's a bit of a suspect relation, at least historically speaking, between philosophy and philosophers and their interventions into politics. And there's quite a few examples of that, I think, in the history, at least of the Western tradition. And so there's something like inherently exciting about Kurti and your involvement with him, and to be reading the stuff that we read for this interview, but also going back to the fact that Žižek ran for office, I think almost prior to his introduction into the Western world.
It was amazing because he was quite active in Slovenia. I don't know if you know this. I'm sure you do. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, during that independence movement. And he was very, very active in politically there. And many leftists really are critical towards him, but I think that it's because of that engagement with him and others of their camp, Slovenia didn't end up like other republics in the former Yugoslavia.
You think it's a direct result of that?
I think so, and I don't think that it's quite an. I don't think this is an exaggeration. Okay, they had a different conjuncture, different geographical position, and all the rest of it. But I think it's largely due to that engagement. I think it was done under the banner of Liberal Party, if I'm not mistaken. But we should bear in mind that in both socialism, liberalism had a completely different meaning.
I feel like because what's exciting about the concept of a Žižekian politics is that it repositions philosophy with psychoanalysis towards thinking intervention and intervention into politics itself. So I don't think that it plays into the suspect tradition of, or at least traditional relationship between philosophy and politics. So there's something seemingly different about your intervention and Žižek's intervention into politics. And I think that it has something to do with, I think in the essay you talk about the differences between doing nothing, doing everything, and doing something. And these are seemingly inconsistent positions of a Žižekian politics. But I think because Žižekian politics forwards, or at least thinks how to intervene and when to intervene, can you speak to that sort of like what's different about maybe Žižekian politics and how it's not the same as traditional interventions of philosophy into politics?
Yeah, well, I think it was Peter Hallward, if I'm not mistaken, one of the guys who critiqued Žižek for apparent for what they refer to as his inconsistency. I think it was in the conference on the idea of communism, the first one in London, where Hallward goes on in arguing something like that there are three variants in which Žižek urges us to act or not to act. It was first to withdraw and do nothing. Where the refusal to act is considered as the truly violent act, or to engage into what Hallward calls the revolution from above. Like when you're in a position where you have to do everything. And then the third one is this idea of adopting a rather more pragmatic position and do something be prepared to do something, while being ready to make certain compromises which are necessary in the readiness to take and exercise the state power, right? But I think that this is not Žižek's inconsistency, it is Žižek's own position with regard to his own work and to politics itself, because whatever the concrete situation, the relation of the subject to itself is always one of cutting off whatever ties one to the dominant ideology. And we have to be reminded that Žižek claims that ideology critique is always based on a certain context. It's I think that this is his Hegelian thesis, and I think this goes back to your question, to the previous question of what does it mean to do politics. I think that underlying the political orientation, the situation doesn't work only as a mere case of universal idea, but how the universal is grounded in every situation. I think that Žižek.
It seems as though crucially here the concept of the event perhaps plays the kind of joining of those two elements, right? Like in your, especially when you were describing the situation in Kosova, it seems like that is kind of a Žižekian event par excellence.
I think so too. But I think that it's extremely important, at least in my reading of Žižek, is that to treat conjunctures as examples, and not as cases. And I think go back. I know there is this book of Gerard Lebrun, a rather conservative guy, but an excellent. He has one of the best books on Hegel I have ever read. Sadly, not translated into English. And the title is "The Patience of the Concept." And it's a book on Hegel's phenomenology. And I think that this is what we need today. Patience of the concept, an orientation in thought. That renders that could create the grounds for the emergence of something new. Be it through immanent critique of the problem itself, or within the coordinates of the problem we are talking about as such, and I think this is quite an important thing, and this is what I've been trying to keep in mind, if I may put it this way, while we were in the office, or while we do political work here in the country.
One of the things that I find so interesting, but also difficult to I think fully grasp, is the difference between thinking and acting that's obviously so present in Žižek's concept of intervening in politics. So behind perhaps a Žižekian politics is a relationship between thinking and acting that I always want to, just by reflex, submit to like a chronological understanding, where there's a kind of primacy of thinking over action. But you, and either or, like one before the other, action has to happen in order for things to be, thought and interpreted. But along those lines of this kind of like potential chronological understanding of the relationship, you mentioned in Lacanian terms, it's a great quote from Lacan, that interpretation is not tested by truth, or like a truth simply out there. It rather unleashes truth insofar as it's effectual and its implications are, taken up. So this seems to unite thinking and action, but is there any way that as an actual political actor, which you've been, is there any way that we can thinking, the relationship between thinking and action, I don't know, in less chronological terms, because they seem to always be happening in a coupled way, in a way that's always one with the other.
Okay, one answer comes to mind immediately, but make sure don't tell this to Kurti, because it's like like doing nothing sometimes, is not really a withdrawal into a passivity. I think that the very idea of pseudo activity, as Žižek would put it, is more dangerous than stepping back and occupying the position of doing nothing. Doing nothing already implies taking a certain position within a certain conjuncture. The one example that comes now to mind, and not the one that I wanted to tell you about, is like, well, one way of doing nothing and being really commie radicals would be not giving money to the banks, you know?
Right.
I know, I get it, but, you know, it's just to illustrate the point. The other one is, and I think we did that, by doing nothing, you are, let's say, by not complying to the orders of Mr. Grenell while we were in the government, that was much more violent than opposing him as such, you know?
Right. Yeah, and sometimes
perhaps-
we do things in order to avoid thinking about them, like
Yeah,
bailing
and
out the
sometimes-
banks and corporations, and you know,
sometimes
20.
like only serve to help the system function even smoothly,
Yeah.
in a simple way, like Syriza did in Greece. You know, capitalism is much happier now after Syriza orchestrated the whole, transformed the country as such. Does it make sense?
Because yeah.
So doing nothing is not an occupying the position of a benevolent spectator. You know, it is actually not refusing to engage in the pseudo activities or in the struggles which are not our own, which contain no grain of emancipation whatsoever.
Right.
And to illustrate the other critique of where I think critique of Hallward is problematic, you know, Bernie Sanders in the US, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, I know if you compare it to Sweden in the 70s, Bernie is nothing but a liberal. But within a certain conjuncture, that is the US political and ideological situation, Bernie Sanders is an event, so to speak, you know. Of course, I'm being slightly cynical, but you know what I mean. So those compromises are necessary sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
while not keeping the position of a beautiful soul, which I find to be very, very, very problematic.
So maybe, yeah, quickly, could you outline that concept, because I think it's very important for thinking through these these liberal dominated times.
Yeah. It's from Hegel's phenomenology, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it's essential for Žižekian thinking, especially in about his politics, and it was first elaborated in his the sublime object of ideology, at least in English, you know, and the beautiful soul is that high moral position, you know, which is always afraid of wrongdoings.
Yeah.
You know, it prefers to stay at a distance from the place where things really happen, occupy the position of the innocent observer, and always engage in this deploring of the wicked ways the world is, you know. But what the position of the beautiful soul tends to forget is that moral insights really do not have any say in the way or how the spirit actualizes itself and takes a certain form, so to speak, you know. And we shouldn't, I think there is another point, because we shouldn't take the position of the beautiful soul as a position of inactivity. How should I put it? The falsity of the beautiful soul is in the very mode of activity, which is implied in the position of inactivity as such. You know, it's structure, the way the beautiful soul structures the so-called objective world in advance, so that it is able to assume to have a say in it, with that constitutive role of fragile, innocent victims, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So
it seems
Lenin was the very opposite of this. You know, like, for instance, you have all these crazy radical leftists, you know, but they cannot get more than 10 people within the organization, you know. And I think they enjoy this position because that gives them that superior, moral superior position in which everyone else is either a traitor to the interests of working class, or a traitor to the idea, but they would never dirty their hands at all. And I think
it seems as though that.
I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. No. Oh, I was just going to say, it seems as though that notion of enjoyment, in terms of political participation, is kind of a crucial like hurdle right now in terms of especially like online discourse, etc. But just to link up what you were saying in terms of the sublime object and Žižek's position in that, it seems as though a lot of this has to do with fantasy and critique of ideology. In that, you write in your essay that politics is a reorientation of the subject in its relation to the fundamental fantasy. And I'm just wondering if we can think of kind of realignment politically as a kind of realignment towards a different kind of fantasy. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I agree with this. I think that's one of the ways in which we can designate, if I may use this term, politics proper with a capital P, from the one which is engaged into this actual work of again dirtying your hands, of really trying to make a difference in the social field. You remember this. Žižek uses this example all the time. A drink before, a cigarette after. Even his big fat book, the Less Than Nothing, is divided into a drink before and a cigarette after. You remember this, right?
Yeah.
And now I see why Žižek is absolutely right in this. What happened the day after? Like, how do you smoke that cigarette? And that is essential. What changes in the actual daily life of the majority of the people? And that is where the politics, you can qualify politics as progressive, emancipatory or not, because it's very easy. It is relatively very easy to invite thousands into the streets, and as a political movement, we did that for over more than a decade, right? Mm-hmm. You have that aesthetic moment. Everybody is in love with one another, and oh my God, But what about the cigarette? Let's not forget that we need to have a smoke. And does it make sense?
Cigarettes.
Yeah. No, but I think that this is really, really essential. True. Because I'm more and more skeptical about the leftists who do nothing but crave for the demos. And don't get me wrong, they're necessary, Mm-hmm. But when the demos or occupations or this and that become a goal in itself, they're perceived as an accomplishment, I think we're in deep trouble.
Right. That was definitely, it seemed to be the limitation this past summer of the protests around the U.S. Like, to many, it seemed merely enough that people were just in the streets, and then it kind of just kind of dissolves without any kind of concrete change.
Yeah, right. Because think about this. What is the main? How far the left has gone in its proposal for an alternative, so to speak, of the system, right? It's funny because the furthest we have gone is the universal basic income, and that is really the lubricant to the to capitalism as such. You just help it function. It functions in that way to help capitalism kick in. But let's go a bit further than this. Like, think about socialism. That you have all these leftists who go from who propose all these variants of how the socialism for the 21st century will be. I even saw that there was a book now just recently published with the title "The Socialist Manifesto." It's Marx was alive, he would have had this Goebbels instinct. He would have. And I'm sorry, this sounds cynical, but I truly mean this. Socialism, and I will be as blunt as I possibly can, is that what will ultimately save capitalism.
Right.
It is not a negation to capitalism as such. Let me give you an example. 2008 or 9, the financial crisis, bailing out banks and so on. Or China. China needs socialism to put forward, to maintain and push forward its own. How do they call it? Socialism with Chinese characteristics. Yeah. There was something in the Communist Manifesto which Marx referred to as vulgar communism. I think that is what socialism stands for today. Vulgar communism. Think about it. Socialism stands for public or state property. Whereas in capitalism, property is at least predominantly of a private nature. Therefore, socialism is not the abolition of property as such as Marx and Engels envisioned in their Communist Manifesto. It merely represents a transformation of ownership, a shift from private property of the means of production, capitalism, to that of the state or publicly owned one, which is socialism. And again, it is not negation of property as such, but rather the negation of one particular type, which leaves untouched the field of social relations in which property, be it state or private or publicly owned, operates. So even in socialism, property remains the touchstone of all the existing social relations. And if I may push a little bit with Hegel, if that's fine with you, socialism is an abstract negation of property, and this is highly problematic. Think about even a little bit more. Like you have Bill Gates and Elon Musk who are talking about the necessity of socialism to change humankind.
But you'll never hear Elon Musk talk about the values of communism, for instance.
Never. And because I fear that our future may even be socialist, a socialism which is being prepared by the capitalist class itself, the biggest speculators, and it will be like, how was it in the previous century? Barbarism or socialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll get both.
Do you think then that like, and maybe we'll ask you sort of maybe what your definition of communism might be in relation to this kind of in the relation to how you just fleshed out socialism. But is communism for you maybe you're hinging on this notion of property? Is it about a different relation to state, right? Because it seems like you're suggesting that there's a relationship inherent to socialism and the state, the way that we understand the state now, that is friendly with capitalism, if not just another form of capitalism. How does communism for you reconfigure a relationship between state and politics that wouldn't, that doesn't fall into the traps of socialism and potentially our socialist future?
Oof. Guys, I really hate you.
Yeah, we're proud of the big guns.
or whatever.
These are really, really bad actions, it's
No wrong answer.
Yeah, no, I know, but this is like, this is what I'm really struggling with now, as together with Frank and Žižek, we are working on a sequel to our Marx book.
We went through that book with Frank Ruda, and it's fantastic. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, we're doing one now on Hegel, and we're working now as we speak on the manuscript, and we're supposed to hand it in a month. And it's like, one of the things I've been trying to do recently is write something on the Žižekian Hegelian idea of the state. I think that
Right.
there is an absolute necessity to recuperate what back in the days it was called, what back in the days the old Hegelians inherited from Hegel. Christianity, Christianity and the state.
Which had been kind of in the historical sense of Hegel's trajectory after the fact was sort of seen as the right Hegelians, right? The ones that...
Yeah, but I think that is truly essential. I think that if you, I think that there is no Hegel without that, and those two things, and I think it would be a mega catastrophe to formulate this in Žižek's terms if we leave that to those concepts to right-wingers or liberals or others. I think there is a true necessity to recuperate these notions or the conceptual necessity of war, which I'm going through Kant recently, and I am finding some really interesting notes of Kant on the war. Even the guy who wrote the Eternal Peace, sometimes he defends the idea of war. Can you believe it? I mean, it's quite crazy. I was not aware of it. Skipping, but I think that for both Žižek and Hegel, the state is the answer to the problem of internationalism as well as to the problem of the commons, which doesn't fit
Right.
or is limited to the, let's call it, nation state. I think Hegel was really aware of this when he defined in his Elements of the Philosophy of Right the state as the march of God in the world. A state which is ultimately not representative of a nation or a community. And I think that this for Hegel was very much actual because the problem of dealing with multiple nations, as was the case with Prussia, the pre-German state, and I think that another leap can make leap into reading the European Union, not as a Hegelian state, don't get me wrong, but as something that can have the potential to be transformed into what can come close to the idea of the Hegelian state. So his Volksgeist, the spirit of the nation, he has been accused of, which led many to accuse him as the Hitler before Hitler or the German
fascist or something.
I don't think that it can be interpreted in any way and in any form in the spirit of a national or romantic vision. It does not create the character of a people or the nation, Volksgeist, that is, but is ultimately a result or a product of its religious, cultural, and other traits. So I think that the creation of a state based on a Volksgeist is not that of a national state. Not like this spirit of a nation as one. So the state is always at the level of self consciousness, so to speak. Like ultimately, in one way, even the Paris Commune can be said to be a certain form of a state in Hegel's mind. So I think that the first, the starting point, the elementary position should be the appropriation of Hegel's idea as the idea of what he calls, again in the same book, ethical state. A state which is founded upon a shared ethical order, and he develops this again and again within on the phenomena, on the philosophy of right, So how to move from this into the idea of communism, of a communist state? I don't know really exactly what what should I say about this? But I know that there are certain situations in the world, as it is, that render visible that the current form of the state, which is national state, is not sufficient. We are faced first with the idea of refugee crisis, not with the idea, but with the problem of the refugee crisis, right? How do we deal with that? Whatever we do as individuals, as nation state, it is certainly not enough. So a different form of organization is needed in this. Somehow, let's call it a pan-European or even a bigger form of social organization. Or what are we going to do with the ecological catastrophes? Sooner or later, the Middle East will be unlivable because of the radical change in their weather condition. Or the guy that the three of us, Frank, Slavoj, and I really appreciate very much, Jean-Pierre Dupuy. The theorist of catastrophe. I don't know if you guys.
We have not visited him yet. Actually, we should.
Oh no, he's incredible. I mean, like he's one of the best you can get. And he was in Japan as part of some committee for atomic, I don't know what. And just after that Fukushima thing, a couple of years ago. And for some 48 hours, the entire state was in a state of panic because they thought like they had to evacuate the entire population of Tokyo. Where do you take them? So I think that there is this necessity to move beyond the form of nation state on one side, and on the other, economy. There should be a different form of organization, economy, which doesn't fall neither into the market nor within the state. A third instance, so to speak, should be invented.
Well, the way that I see it is that communism and how it plays into the relationship between politics, maybe capital P politics, and the state, is that it's not actually like the goal wouldn't be a communist state, but that communism would be a way of diagnosing the sort of problem now in the current definition of state politics, and then getting to a new formulation of the state. That communism would be the way of kind of reformulating the antagonisms so that we can, that are present in capitalism, so that we can understand a new role of the state in relationship to these contradictions and antagonisms that are present. So to me, communism isn't necessarily the goal, but a way of diagnosing the current situation so that we can, get a new appreciation on statist politics. But to me, it seems like what looms in your text and also in Žižek's is that a master is in some way also part of this. What I'll say is a process of redefining state, the relationship between politics and the state. And I mean, I don't know, the master to me is a looming concept, right? And I wonder if does your idea of Kuti, for example, does he play in as a master, or is the master is the master something that is inherently necessary for this kind of understanding of communism and a new relationship between state and politics?
First, I really much agree with you. I really like that you said communism is not a goal, but a new beginning. And I think Marx wrote this in their Marx and Engels in their German ideology, if I'm not mistaken, right? Where they say that communism is that movement which revolutionizes permanently the existing order of things. Or how does the formulation go? Right. But I think that it will be, for instance, I think it was Fred Jameson who wrote this in an American Utopia book, that there won't be really peace if communism is ever realized. Like all these envy, resentment, and other things will explode. Precisely because we will have a more egalitarian society. How do you deal with those things? I think that all these questions have to be addressed in a way or another. You know what I mean? And as for the master, I can't see politics without masters, without a leader.
Yeah.
A leader who is probably even like Hegel's king. But I think that the leader is somebody who becomes a master or a king because others treat him like a king. And I just
Can I ask you?
I can't see a political organization which functions horizontally only. I think that there has to be a figure there.
Of just a following question, and then maybe I'll drop the spiked bat. But I'm curious, like the understanding the role of the master. I feel like in relationship to this kind of this understanding of communism as a transition to a new form of state, I think that it has a lot to do with a distinction between alienation and separation that both you and Žižek have brought up. That the master, similar to the analyst, would allow us to sort of return us to the abyss of our own freedom, which would be a new form of alienation, which is assumed ontologically and subjectively constitutive of the subject. But what is separation? Is separation the alienation felt once we're returned to ourself, from the a discourse with the master? Like, is separation something that is different from alienation that's proper to maybe say capitalism, or you know what I mean? Is the master inherently important to?
I'm going to answer to you by critiquing Althusser. Slavoj Žižek wrote a lot about separation. And there was, if you think about the previous century Marxist thinkers, they were always afraid by alienation. They had this idea that we have, and then Althusser goes back on enumerating how many times that Marx used this concept in his early work, and then in Capital and others, right? But I think that in order to be able to function as a society, like when we different cultures, habits, traits, or thrown into one place, I think that a radical alienation is necessary.
Well, maybe just briefly tie up that point about alienation, because usually I think alienation is understood as an immense problem. The problem of alienation and how to become, unalienated, how to retain some or regain some kind of sense of connectedness.
Or with properties of human being as such. At least that's how. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I don't know. I found it to be way too humanist to be able to speak about or take a position against alienation. I really agree here with Žižek, who was for more alienation in our societies. We have to have a new code of civility, but keeping the other at the distance.
Well, the other at a distance is no problem these days. And maybe we can take that onwards into thinking about this new world that we're living in. After these interesting points that you've made about Žižekian politics and everything else.
Thank you guys so much. It was an honor.
Yeah, it was really great to have you on. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.